Prynawn da.
Good afternoon. Just 2.5 years after his election as Assembly Member for the South East of Wales and at just 34 years of age, it is my sad duty today to state in the Senedd that we have lost our fellow member and friend Steffan Lewis over the weekend. His dear family and friends have joined us today in the gallery as we pay tribute to him. May we all rise here in the chamber and across our whole estate to commemorate Steffan Lewis.
I agor y teyrngedau prynawn.
To begin the tributes this afternoon, Adam Price, Leader of Plaid Cymru. Thank you, Llywydd. Wales is a small nation, but every now and then we breed giants. I got to know Steffan Lewis first over 20 years ago. In light of the Islwyn by-election, we heard talk of this incredible young boy from the Gwent Valleys, who was not only a member of Plaid Cymru, but of the SNP and the Sons of Cornwall too, and had managed to get the WRU to note this in the programme for the Wales-England game when Steffan was mascot for the Wales team. Steffan never did things by halves. Within a few years, Steffan was addressing the Plaid Conference for the first time at 14 years of age. 2 years younger than William Hague, and as he was keen on to point out, he was far more effective. And even at that time, he wasn't little Steffan. Steffan was to be great. There was incredible depth to his character from the outset. His mother, Gail, at the ironing board, and him as a 9-year-old asking all sorts of questions like water from a well. Where, why and when, and most often why, as some sort of apprentice Vincent Kane, the potential was spotted and the roots took hold. Gail would highlight articles in the Western Mail and would buy him books on Welsh history. But writing stories or history books wasn't his destiny. He was to make history.
He bit the definition of a passionate Welshman. But he was also a man of Gwent, and he saw in the triumphs and tragedies of that great county the key to understanding the problems and possibilities of the nation as a whole. It was Gwent that brought the first blossoming of Welsh nationalism in the form of Cymru Fydd to a shuddering halt in a stormy meeting in Newport in 1896. But it also produced in Steffan, and before him Phil Williams, two of the most cerebral and creative minds in 100 years of the modern national movement. If our task was to forge a new Wales, then the die would be cast in Gwent, the social laboratory that gave the world socialised medicine. His county was not just the gateway to Wales, but the key to its future. Steffan was obsessed by history, as his sister Nia soon discovered, whose summer holidays growing up were a Wales-wide odyssey of castles, battles, and the birthplaces of famous Welsh heroes. But while Steffan wanted us to learn about our history, he didn't want us imprisoned by it. He tried in vain to get a party that up until recently still had Lewis Valentine's lyrics to Sibelius Finlandia as its official party anthem to adopt instead Fleetwood Mac's Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, famously used, of course, by Bill Clinton in his 1992 presidential campaign. For Steffan, it was the mirror of our past that often offered the vision of our future. A speech he made to our conference after being selected as a candidate for the 2016 election sums this up best. And I'd like to read the closing section now. Here is Steffan in his own words. You know, I'm a historian myself by training, and I take a great deal of pleasure looking and learning about our past. But in a few months, I am due to become a father for the first time. That's made me think an awful lot more about our future rather than our past. What inheritance will there be for the next generation? What accomplishments will that generation look back upon and mark out as decisive points in the course of our country? Friends, all of that is in our hands now. He went on to talk about how the great inspiration he had drawn from the referendum in Scotland. But the point for Steffan is the choices we made here in Wales. Here's Steffan again. As much as we take inspiration from others, we will thrive as a movement and as a nation only when we find our own path, when we inspire one another, when we come together to resolve to build a new society and a new state. We are going to walk that path together, north and south, local and newcomer, together as one Wales towards the free Wales. Steffan, sadly, will not see the Wales of which he dreamed. But for his son, Celyn, and his generation, he has laid the foundation, and it's we now who must build the road. He understood, like that other Welsh giant, Bran, that the essence of leadership is to take people with you, to build bridges. In the words of one of his favourite poets, Harry Webb, if we Welsh could only be inseparable, we would be insuperable. Steffan ended that speech by saying that he wasn't going to be the typical politician and reel off a long list of promises to the electorate. Instead, he was going to make just one promise. He was going to make us proud. Well, you made us all proud, Steffan. Proud of you, proud to have known you, to have called you friend and colleague. You made us proud to be Welsh, by your example that will endure. You may not get there with us, Steffan, but we will get there because of you. Steffan had all the qualities to become one day the father of the nation. That sadly cannot be, but he was the nation's perfect son. Mae'n diolch ni gyd.
Our thanks is unending to you, Steffan, to your mother for giving you to us, and to Shona for sharing us with us all.
Galfodd fy nawr ar y prif wyni.
Now call on the First Minister, Mark Drakeford.
Diolch, Llywyd. The sense of sadness and of loss is profound in the Assembly this afternoon as we think first of Steffan's family and his friends, but we think as well of the loss to this Assembly and to the future of our nation. I'm very conscious that, unlike other members, and like Adam, who has just spoken, that I didn't know Steffan at all until I met him here after his election. And in the way that chance has it, Llywyd, the responsibilities that he discharged over that brief period for Plaid Cymru in the Chamber, speaking on Brexit, speaking on finance, happened to be the responsibilities that I held in the Welsh Government at the same time. And as a result, and much more than would normally be the case, I found myself in his company. And he was without any shadow of a doubt, one of the most decent and able politicians of his generation. Somebody who, as Adam Price has just said, when he came through the door to discuss something that mattered passionately to him, his ambition always seemed to me to be to see where common ground could be forged and where we could agree together on the important responsibilities that fall to us all. And that's how I ended up working with him on Securing Wales' Future, a document that has served us so well in the past 2 years and will go on, I know, being a touchstone of the sort of nation that we want to be in the context we find ourselves in today. And beyond that as well, conversations about finance, about tax, about Gwent, and the things that mattered to him there. And inevitably, like all of us, when something awful like this happens, you find yourself remembering, you think of conversations that you've had. And I thought over the weekend of an occasion where we had talked together about the importance of us jointly being able to present a copy of Securing Wales' Future to the UK government. It was a product of both our parties. We both had a lot to do with its production, and we wanted to go together and make sure that we presented it to the UK government. And lo and behold, a senior Secretary of State in the UK government was visiting Cardiff, and we were able to go and present the document to him. And Steffan introduced the document in the way exactly as you would expect, articulate and to the point. And we received a reply from the Secretary of State, and as we left the room, Steffan said to me, well, if I wasn't a nationalist before I came in this room, I'm definitely one as I leave it. He was, as you all know, a thoughtful, sensitive and committed individual, but he was a funny person, somebody whose company you wanted to be in, somebody who you learnt a lot from, even in those more casual moments. It's very difficult, isn't it, to remember that it is barely 6 weeks since he last spoke in this chamber. And difficult to remember that it's only 6 months ago since many of us here in South Wales and in the North, where a number of us were cross parties in this chamber, set off to walk together across the front in Llandudno. It was a beautiful day. It was one of those high summer's days when the sun shone and you couldn't but be optimistic about the future. And here we are, barely 6 months later, in the dark winter days, a day when the sun for sorrow will not show his head, and neither for a long time Llywydd will we.
Arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr.
Leader of the Conservatives, Paul Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd, and I too rise with a heavy heart to pay tribute to Steffan this afternoon. And on behalf of the Welsh Conservatives, I'd like to extend our sincere condolences to his wife, Shona, son Celyn, and to all his family and close friends. Nothing can prepare you for losing someone at such a tender age. Even though he was only elected to the Assembly in 2016, I was very much aware that he was a rising star within his party well before being elected, from the conversations I'd had with some of my colleagues in Plaid Cymru. Steffan described being elected to this place as his dream job, and he fulfilled the role with distinction right up until the end, always ensuring the voices of his constituents were heard. As the First Minister said, it was clear to everyone that he was a very able, talented and a committed politician with so much more to give. He was never known to raise his voice when he delivered a contribution, as the chamber always fell silent when he spoke, as people genuinely wanted to hear what he had to say. Perhaps sometimes I didn't want to hear what he had to say, because he always had something powerful and intelligent he had to say, which sometimes countered strongly the arguments we were putting forward on this side of the chamber. But not only did he put forward powerful and intelligent arguments, he also had always something new to add to the debate, something that none of us had thought about. He would always approach a debate from a different angle. This, I believe, was one of his greatest strengths. Even though we were on different sides of the political spectrum, I had enormous respect for his principled stance on the issues which really mattered. He will be remembered as a politician who was always true to his principles. It was absolutely clear to me how dedicated and committed he was to his constituents in the way he never allowed his illness to prevent him from coming here to represent his constituents. The bravery and courage he demonstrated throughout his illness will be an example to us all. I am sure that Stefan's legacy will live on through his family and indeed through this assembly, and I hope that more people like Stefan will enter politics to make a real difference to the people of Wales. It was a privilege and an honour to have known Stefan, and my thoughts and prayers are with Shona Celyn and his family at this very, very difficult time. Llywydd, every parliament should have a Stefan. We're just very sad that we've lost ours. He will be sorely missed on all sides of this chamber.
Galwaf nawr ar David.
Now call on David Rowlands on behalf of UKIP.
Diolch, Llywydd. I first met Stefan at a hustings in Blaen y Gwent during the last Assembly elections. But it was obvious to me at that time that he was an exceptionally gifted person. Over his 2.5 years in the Assembly, I believe we have all witnessed his special capabilities. And I know all in this chamber will agree with me that we have lost one of our most able AMs. On a personal level, although we of course disagreed politically, he was always polite and friendly whenever we crossed paths on the Assembly estate. I, for one, am deeply saddened by Stefan's passing, and my thoughts go out to his family at this very distressing time. But I hope that they shall find solace in his very considerable achievements.
Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. This is possibly the most difficult contribution I've ever had to make in this Senate in the 15 years that I've been an Assembly member. All of us in the Plaid Cymru family are beyond devastated that we've lost our friend and colleague, and our hearts go out to his family, who I know who are in incredible pain at his loss. But Stefan is a loss to our nation too, to our democracy. He's a loss to our future. Stefan had one of the sharpest political brains in Welsh politics. He was incredibly well read, and he had an international understanding, which meant that he was always able to draw on examples, sometimes pretty obscure examples, to highlight or prove his point. As others have said, his contributions, especially on Brexit, but on other matters too, was always considered, measured, well-informed, and more often than not, not always, but more often than not, Stefan would end up being proved right. Plenty of people have paid tribute to Steph's public political contribution, and many of you here will be well aware of that. But I'd like to focus my brief remarks on Stefan as the person. We worked very closely together for around 3 years before he was elected as an Assembly member. He was thorough, he could think outside the box, and he could think strategically. He was incredibly loyal and honest, and he was very prepared to say when he disagreed with something or he didn't like something. But he was also a team player, prepared to work extremely hard for the success of all of our shared goals. With Steph, no matter how difficult or insurmountable a problem might seem, he just would not accept that there was no solution. We tackled many tricky problems together. We made some fabulous political interventions together, and I've got some amazing memories of my work and friendship with Stefan, which I will now be able to keep forever. All of us are privileged to have memories. We're all privileged to have been part of his life. And we all want to pull together now to support his family and each other through the difficult weeks and months ahead. Nos da, Steffan. Sleep well, my friend.
David Rees.
Diolch, Llywydd. I only knew Steffan, like many others in this chamber, since he was elected in 2016 to join us here. And in that short time, his decency and his intellect has made its mark on myself and many others as we are here and across the chamber today. My colleague Jack Sargent came into this chamber with the thought of a kinder politics. Steffan embodied that kind of politics he wanted to do. He was decent, he was well thought, he considered his arguments, he put forward a strong case, as has been highlighted already. Llywydd, Steffan's contribution to the Assembly has been recognised by all members, but his contribution to the External Affairs Committee, in which he sat, was enormous. He brought to us the thoughtful consideration of the arguments, and he put that thoughtful consideration not with an agenda of anything else other than the best for the people of Wales. That was his contribution. Now, we all know his political thinking was paramount to him was the existence of an independent Welsh national state. But more important to him was the actual improvement of lives of people in Wales. And that's what he chose to achieve and work towards. And everything he did was for that. He brought to us cut-in ideas, scrutiny of ministers, which sometimes they didn't enjoy either, because they were sometimes very wary of Steffan when he was in the committee, because they knew what was coming. He went everywhere to try and get that information. I remember him telling me he went to London to go all around the embassies and the consulates to get information about what the future Europe would look like. I even remember him telling me that he was planning a trip to Norway with his family, with the real intention of going to the Swedish-Norway border to see what was going on that border. Now, whilst we will miss his intellect and sharpness here in this Assembly, it is nothing compared to the loss that his family will be experiencing at this difficult time. And my thoughts and prayers are with his family, now and in the future. But one thing I do know is that his son will grow up to see his ambition realised at one point. I do believe that. Steffan's time might have been short, but his legacy will live on.
Vicky Howells.
Diolch, Llywydd, and I rise to speak with a heavy heart on behalf of the Labour group. And firstly, I'd like to extend all of our condolences to Steffan's wife, Shona, his son, Celyn, the rest of his family and friends. And Steffan was so widely respected by members of all parties across this chamber and held in really great esteem. His razor-sharp intellect was clear to see, his grasp of the key issues and his genuine passion to make Wales a better place. And in the work that he did on first proposing the EU Continuity Bill and his work thereafter on securing Wales's future, he will undoubtedly leave a strong legacy here in Wales. I'd also like to say a few points personally as well, because I arrived in this chamber in May 2016 at exactly the same time as Steffan, and I was struck very quickly by how non-partisan a place this chamber is. And it was actually Steffan who played a key role in first showing me that, as we both served on BIPA together, the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly. And I remember meeting with him and the other representatives prior to our first trip and feeling somewhat trepidatious about how I would get on with members of other parties during that trip. But Steffan actually jumped over the security barriers in T Howell. Such was his enthusiasm for the work we were about to undergo. And that certainly did break down any barriers that there were. And from then on, I found that there was nothing that he could not talk about and show a huge amount of knowledge on. As other colleagues have said, you know, from international examples to national and to local, the depth of knowledge and passion he had across all different areas of politics was really quite incredible. But virtually every conversation that I had with him would always come back to his family. And that was something that really struck me. He was clearly very much a family man, a very proud father, and spoke with great affection of his wife and his parents too, and how they had shaped his politics. His talent will undoubtedly be a great loss to the party Plaid Cymru, a great loss to Wales as a nation as well. But of course, more importantly, the loss that is felt by his family and his friends too. But like Steffan, I too am a historian at heart, and I am confident that when the history of this Fifth Assembly is written and this chapter of the history of Plaid Cymru, Steffan's role will be a shining light.
Rhyn ap Iorwerth.
There is an empty chair behind me. It's a chair that's been kept warm for Steff ever since he started his battle with cancer a little over a year ago. It feels like yesterday. I was looking at his text the other day. "Can you come out of committee to speak to me?" he said. And that was a dark day. But Steff was determined to continue to cast his light upon us. He would still come here, as we've heard, particularly for discussions on European matters, or to demand fair play for some cause or another in Gwent and the South East, where he was raised and which was so dear to him. In his early 20s, he made an impression on me for the first time. I was introducing a television hustings programme from Ebervale during the Blaenau Gwent by-election, and Steff was a very young Plaid Cymru candidate at that election. I think he was just 21. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, he's good. And he was very good. He was very special. It was a huge pleasure then to become a colleague of his in due time and to call him a friend. Myself was an elected member, first of all, although he was in Plaid Cymru way before I was, and he was a key member of the team. And then he too was elected, and becoming a member of our National Senedd meant everything to him. For Steff, it was a privilege to be here, serving his community and serving Wales. But it was that community in Wales is privilege, and all of our privilege, that Steff had decided to commit to serve the nation in its parliament. He was a dear man, a fair politician. He was unselfish. We saw that in the way in which he was so eager to help other patients in speaking openly of his cancer. He was a mindful individual, choosing his words carefully. It reminded me of my late mother in that regard. She had given so much to Wales in so many ways. And I heard in tributes to her that my mother would hold back, but when she spoke, we would know that she would have something meaningful to say, and everyone would listen. And that's how it was with Steff. And Steff, I can not pay you much greater tribute than to say that you reminded me of my mother. Steff's contribution was always valuable.
In Wales has been cut way too short. But in a few short years, he made a contribution that made him stand out as a politician of rare ability, with real clarity and vision for his community and his nation. And as a man of integrity, fairness, sincerity, determination, and total selflessness. He brought people together. And in that, he's an example to all of us. Heddiw, da ni'n deud diolch, Steff.
Today, we say thank you, Steff. We miss you and miss what you would have done for us. But we give thanks for everything that you did and for laying the foundations for an independent Wales. We thank you for your vision, your leadership in such a brief life. Yes, we'll keep your seat warm. We kept your seat warm, but that wasn't to be. Now we will do everything to keep your flame alight. Rest in peace, Steffan.
Jane Hutt.
I'd always heard about Steffan Lewis from my former ministerial colleague and fellow Assembly member Jocelyn Davis, who was so proud of this young political activist who volunteered in her office. And when she told me she was standing down at the 2016 election, she actually said she was glad that this would provide an opportunity for Steffan to take his place in the Assembly as her successor, Plaid Cymru Assembly member for the South Wales East region. Of course, Steffan was known by many of us for his work behind the scenes before 2016, working for Leanne as her speechwriter, and we knew he would be formidable when the time came for him to enter the public world of politics as an Assembly member. And of course, he made his mark from day one as the youngest member elected in 2016. So I recall, as many will as well, Steffan taking his seat here in the chamber with great confidence, clarity, but also humble about his role, the opportunity he had, clear about his politics, of course. And I remember he said, and you can recall that, and his colleagues, that he wouldn't be using his computer because he wanted to be fully engaged in debates. He didn't want to have that charge we often get is, what are you doing staring at your computer all day? And I think he stuck to that promise. So if we wanted him, we had to get him out of the chamber or text him. He was ready from the start to work outside the party confines to achieve shared goals and aims, and he took the lead as we quickly moved into the pre- and post-referendum world as the party spokesperson, working with Labour on securing Wales's future. And of course, that has stood the test of time today, as the First Minister said today and indeed last week. But he was also expert and steadfast as finance spokesperson, sat on both finance and the external affairs committees as I did. And when I joined those committees last November, I enjoyed them so much more when he was able to join us, as Di Risa said. Despite his advancing illness and arduous treatment, which he faced with such courage, which we can, all of us will have learnt from. But he did, as has been said, never left any Labour minister or colleague off the hook in terms of his scrutiny, but always supportive when he saw common cause. I also want to pay tribute to the role Steffan played in promoting the importance of Wales in the world and the importance of external affairs. So he handed over to me the rapporteur role he'd played with Jeremy Miles, when he was on the committee, looking at the opportunities for Wales in the world as part of our responsibilities towards international development. And I know Lynyd Morgan will be taking this forward, but also post-Brexit, determined to ensure that Wales was not bypassed and was recognised diplomatically, culturally, socially and economically. The Walk with Staff has been mentioned, organised by NIA last July. I remember walking with Di Lloyd and Jeff Cuthbert along the canal to Blackwood. It will be a lasting memory for all of us, and I'll remember that hug with Steffan on that walk. And for Steffan, that was so important that he was raising those funds for the Lindra. And of course, with that, my heartfelt thoughts and sympathies are with his family today and in the weeks and months and years ahead. Steffan, you've left a great legacy as a passionate Welsh European, an international citizen of the world, and we'll continue to help pursue those goals in your memory because you were far-sighted in your political vision as a proud and outstanding person and politician of Wales.
Carwyn Jones.
Thank you, Llywydd. May I begin by paying tribute to Steffan and his family and to extend my sympathies to their family in their loss. Although, of course, might be expecting something to happen, the loss is still a bitter blow.
It's difficult to conceive that Steffan was a member of the Assembly for such a short time, so great was his contribution. We sat here in this chamber and in committees, and we saw how considerable his knowledge was, and of course his desire to service his country. He quite quickly became respected by so many around this chamber in all parties, and when he spoke, what he said was always incisive and thought-provoking. Steffan was always worth listening to. He offered so much to the debate on Brexit through his work on developing a vision from how Brexit should work to the suggestion of a continuity bill. And I believe he was the first member in this chamber to suggest a continuity bill, and he deserves the credit for that. On a personal level, I think it's entirely right to say that Steffan was well liked by all. He was a proud member of Plaid Cymru. We've all seen, of course, the photograph of him addressing the Plaid Cymru conference in 1987 when he was, I think, 14. That would have taken a considerable feat of confidence to be able to do that. But despite, of course, his strongly held principles, he was always ready to work with other parties when he felt it was for the good of the nation. We often aspire, don't we, as politicians, to work with others, but Steffan didn't just aspire to do that, he practiced it as well. I, for one, found his contribution to the debate on Brexit to be invaluable, and some of you will know that I was asked before Christmas in a TV interview to name those I respected in other parties. Without disrespect to others in the chamber, Steffan was one of those names that I mentioned. The news that Steffan had been diagnosed, of course, with cancer was a great shock to him and to his family. There's no doubt about that. He shared his diagnosis with me. He knew that my wife, Lisa, worked for Macmillan. He knew that it was a very difficult prognosis. But despite that, he carried on with his work and worked hard to raise money for those who are living with cancer. And those memories, of course, will be there among so many members who remember the work that he did to raise money for Velindre. There would, of course, have been low moments in his fight against cancer. But one thing we do know is that he found the resolve and the strength to inspire others. There are very few people with those qualities. Steffan was one of them. We have lost a future star of Welsh politics, but his family have lost a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. And today we stand with them and remember Steffan.
Sian Gwenllian. Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd. Like everyone in the chamber today, I send my deepest condolences to Shona, Celyn, Gail, Nia and the whole family, and I wish to thank you for sharing Steffan with us. He was taken away far too soon, and his loss is great to his family more than anyone, of course, but also to Plaid Cymru, the people of the south east of Wales, this assembly, and to Wales. He contributed so much, and his intellect will light the way for us. He will be an inspiration, and he will walk with us on the journey towards a free Wales. I first came across Steff at a public meeting in Penygroes in the Arfon constituency. Alan Fred had insisted that this bright young boy from Gwent should join us to share his vision. And that is what he did, in a detailed, intelligent, quiet way, but in an entirely convincing and credible way. He had a dream, and he believed that that dream would be realised. Over ensuing years, I would meet Steff at conferences and Plaid events, and in 2016, both of us were elected Assembly members for the first time, and I had the privilege of sitting next to him until quite recently. As we've already heard, he didn't like the computer screen, and therefore if he wanted to send a message to the Llywydd, then very often he would have to go through my computer screen, and then I would pull his leg and say, well, I'm not your personal secretary, Steph. And he would tease me too. For example, when I took every possible opportunity to press for a medical school for Bangor, I would hear, you gogs are far too noisy. And that was one of his favourite phrases. And I delighted in those phrases. I loved to hear his powerful, carefully constructed speeches, but those asides when another member was speaking would always put a smile on my face. This is terrible when a minister was refusing to answer a question or was rambling on, and he would hate to hear members referring to the UK as our nation or our country. He would always correct that. Wales is our nation. Wales is our country. And another thing that wound him up was references to Wales as a small nation. We're not a small nation, he would insist. We are a bigger nation than many other independent nations. In walking to the chamber or whilst waiting to deliver a speech backstage, Steph would say this to me. Here we are, Sian Gwenllian. He'd never call me Sian, he'd always call me by my full name. Here we are, Sian Gwenllian. The woman from Gwynedd and the boy from Gwent. We'll go for it, let's go. Let's show 'em how it's done. I will never forget those words. We represented very different areas, but the boy from Gwent made quite an impression on me, and that bright, principled boy will always be with me in our Senedd, in our conferences, and in my daily life, because that boy from Gwent will always be in my heart, in all of our hearts. And Steph, your dream lives on, and that dream will be realised. Rest in peace, dear friend.
Mike Hedges.
Diolch, Lawrence. Like everybody else in the chamber, I'll miss Stefan. I served in the Finance Committee with him, and we had some interesting times, so I'm not sure that others would think it when we were discussing not land transaction tax and cross-border matters. I'm sure that Stefan and I engaged in very much a dialogue on this, much to the chagrin of other people sat in the chamber. But his encyclopedic knowledge of other borders. When I said about cross-border, and we eventually ended up with 1,000 pieces of land crossing the England-Wales border, he said, that's nothing. How do you think they manage in Portugal and Spain? Or the Walloons and the Flems? How do you think how it works in the rest? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I've been there. I went on holiday to visit it to see. I said, well, I don't think I convinced my wife to go on holiday to see borders, but... the other thing about him, his refusal to use his computer in the chamber, which I found incredibly infuriating. Not as infuriating as Sian Gwenllian did, because the only way you could contact him was by sending Sian a message. Sian, can you ask Stefan if I could talk to you about land transaction tax outside? She said, I am not his secretary. In fact, that must be the thing she said most to him during her time here. Stefan, I'm not your secretary. But you did a fine job as his secretary. But no, he had that belief you should not use the computer in the chamber, and he had that belief, he stuck to it. However annoying it was for the rest of us, he stuck to it. I knew Stefan when he was working in the Plaid Cymru office. I mean, I shared a kitchen with them. Amazing how you know people from the strangest of things within the Assembly. Well, I used the same kitchen as Plaid Cymru do. And all I remember, Stefan, he was always pleasant, always polite, and always a smile on his face. I'll miss him, but not half as much as his family.
Jenny Rathbone.
I didn't know Stefan very well, but I just wanted to rise very briefly to say what a wonderful man he was. My enduring memory of Stefan is meeting him just by chance, out walking with his family on the Cardiff barrage one balmy October day during that Indian summer that we had. And it was one happy family out with Shona and their son, enjoying the sunshine. But for me, it was such a poignant moment because for me, I wondered how many more of these happy memories were going to be, were they going to be able to share together. I think it's an absolute tragedy for his parents that they're having to bury their son before their time. That is just not the normal order of things. And that is obviously unbelievably painful. But obviously for Shona and Celyn, it leaves a huge gap in their lives. And I just wanted to say to Celyn that he was a truly amazing politician, as hopefully he will appreciate when he's a little bit older. And that he was such a courageous man and really did practice the kind of politics that Jack Sargent promotes so regularly. And I just want to say that it was such a privilege to know him, and I hope that he will inspire us all to up our game and to improve the level of debate that he showed us was perfectly possible without being cantankerous and party political. So thank you so much, Stefan, and our condolences, I'm sure, all of us, to his family.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch fawr. I was about to enter the Newbridge Memorial Hall on Friday evening when the news broke that my political opponent in Islwyn and my also dear colleague Steffan Lewis AM had passed away. So as many have said, my heart does go out to Stefan's wife Shona and son Celyn. At our Islwyn Labour Party meeting of members, there was a genuine sadness at this tragic news, and that is because of the personality who Stefan is. The Islwyn Labour Party held a minute's silence for Stefan and tributes were paid to our countryman. He was highly proud of hailing from Islwyn, as we've already heard, having grown up in Crosskeys, and I know he is fondly remembered from his time as a child in Ysgol Gymraeg Cwngwydden in Abercairn that my daughter also attended. And today we mark our respect for this true son of Wales and a true son of Islwyn, who I also respected greatly as a colleague in the Welsh Parliament, even though, as I said, we were ultimately political opponents. But there was much that we also agreed upon. And as a sentiment in today's speeches, I think that we hear that loudly and clearly. But ultimately, Stefan was a kind and sensitive human being with a razor-sharp intellect. We were both elected for the National Assembly for Wales, as many have said, at the first time in 2016, and as a member of that class, I also vouch loudly that Stefan was an energetic and principled politician who had so much more to give to Welsh public life. And we've already mentioned a kinder politics that Jack Sargent has already talked about at great length, and Stefan was the embodiment of that kinder politics. In the all too short time that he was able to serve as an Assembly member, he demonstrated this with everything that he said and everything that he did, his ability and his calm manner. He used his considerable intellectual powers to make the case, as we've heard earlier, in this chamber, for the Assembly for Wales' rights to be respected following the Brexit negotiations. And it is probably Stefan's work on Brexit in his capacity as party spokesman on the subject where he had his biggest impact. But I will personally always remember him as a principled and decent politician and a decent human being, a sincere and dedicated servant to the people of Islwyn, and I believe we will all miss you. God rest you, Stefan.
Neil McAvoy.
Diolch, Llywydd. I remember hearing Stefan on the radio for the 2006 by-election in Blaenau Gwent, his speech for the declaration, and I was in bed, and I sat up in bed because His words were electrifying, really, really inspirational. I worked with Steffan in 2008 in the Caerphilly council elections, and we got to know each other better when we were first elected for the first time in 2016. And some afternoons we just pop over the road and have a quick drink and a quick chat and just talk about all kinds of things, and especially politics and how things could be done better, and football, Celtic, Cardiff City. I'm really grateful to Steffan for those conversations. He was a really good man who showed so much courage and dignity in the way that he came here and in the way that he did things his way. His far too early passing is a real loss to our country, and I really hope that his family can take some comfort in the fact that so many people, every one of us who knew Steffan, thought so highly of him.
David Melding.
Steffan's voice was a strong voice on the Constitution. He had a depth of understanding that allowed him to soar to the heights of political thought. And Llywydd, we were both elected in 1999, and I don't think I've ever heard a more generous voice on fundamental matters. His knowledge and use of the parliamentary process allowed him to promote the concept of the Continuity Act, as we have heard, something that put pressure on the Welsh and the UK governments at a key moment in our history as an institution. Steffan's authority, however, on constitutional matters was not dry or abstract thing. He spoke with energy and passion, but he also respected the views of others, like myself, who often reached different conclusions. What I found most noble and convincing in Steffan's constitutional insights was the need for a deliberative parliamentary democracy. That is what has been forged by the home nations of the United Kingdom. It is our taproot, something we should all cherish, whether our ultimate goal is an independent Wales or a rejuvenated, devolved UK. How we need such wisdom today of all days as Brexit arrives at a decision point in Parliament. One of the last conversations I had with Steffan was about Alan Watkins' funny and irreverent account of the fall of Mrs. Thatcher, a Conservative coup. And Steffan had that mischievous humour too, seeing the foolishness of politics when it drifts from its firm foundations, as that book masterfully describes. I extend my heartfelt condolences to Steffan's family and friends. Please be comforted by the knowledge that Steffan's was such a true voice. It will never be lost to our memory.
John Griffiths.
Diolch, Llywydd. To lose Steffan at such a tender age is obviously a tragic blow to his family and friends, to his party, Plaid Cymru, to the Assembly as a whole, and to Wales, given the significance of Steffan Lewis as a political figure and the ability that he had, the commitment that he had, which we've heard about across the chamber today. For me, Llywydd, my first memory of speaking to Steffan after he became an Assembly member was when he brought those qualities to the fore and that great concern that he had for Gwent, as we heard from Adam and others, when Steffan came up to me early on and said how committed he was to working across the political parties and how committed he was to understanding Gwent, representing the interests of Gwent and being a champion for that geographical part of Wales. And it subsequently became very clear that he was absolutely genuine about that, as he was about everything else as well. So I know that I speak for all of my Labour Gwent AM colleagues. Rhiannon Passmore has spoken for herself, as it were, but all of us recognise that Steffan was so committed and genuine in that concern for Gwent and that determination to do all that he could for Gwent, but to work across the parties and indeed with a variety of organisations to that end. And as with others, I remember the walk to raise money for Velindre, where it was so clear what widespread support and what important support Steffan had from his family and friends, the political parties again across the chamber, different organisations that he'd worked with over the years and many others. And it was also clear what a comfort that was to Steffan, how important it was to him to draw strength from that support, evidenced on the walk, but evidenced much more widely and generally as well. And also, Clywyd, I just wanted to echo what others said in terms of how brave Steffan was in, using that horrible experience of suffering from cancer for a greater good, to be so willing to talk about the experience, to do interviews, to make public statements, to take part in debates, knowing how important it was for other people suffering from cancer and their families and their friends. And, he went into detail, which I think must be so important, significant and beneficial for other people suffering cancer and their families and friends. And obviously it was very, very moving as well, to read about the memoir that he was preparing for his son, his young son, who could read that when he was older and understand his father better, and understand his father's beliefs and values and principles and draw from those in living his own life and making his own contribution. So I just wanted to echo on behalf of my local Labour colleagues, Llywydd, what so many others have said. What a nice, genuine, committed, able, talented human being Steffan Lewis was, and how significant he was to his country. And I, as others have said, hope that's some comfort to his family and friends at such an incredibly difficult time.
Nick Ramsey.
Clywyd. I last spoke with Steffan on his last visit to the Assembly before Christmas, when I remember speaking to him outside the chamber here in a break in debate. It was clear at that point how ill he was. I told him that we were all of us, every one of us in the chamber, rooting for him. He thanked me for that, and he said it was the work as an Assembly member that was keeping him going, that was inspiring him. And the affection, the love that he felt from all of us Assembly members was making that difference to him. As has been said by his own party, who we love dearly, and other members in this chamber, he was a boy of Gwent. He used to call me the boy of Monmouthshire. I did point out I was from Cwmbran originally, and I could see his little eyes light up as he could think of all sorts of new insults or expressions that he could use in debate across the chamber. Sadly, those debates not to be. But the legacy he leaves, and the feeling that he inspired all of us to feel from whatever part of Wales that was, is something that will live with me forever. Mike Hedges has mentioned Finance Committee. I had the privilege of sitting next to Steffan. It seems for a very long time, but of course it was only a couple of years since 2016 that we were on that committee together. And you're right, Mike, he used to love talking about the border, or really attacking people who wanted to talk about the border. And he would point out there were borders all across the world that didn't cause any problems at all. In terms of trade and in terms of countries being separate. He was right there. Also, whenever there were discussions about Brexit or austerity, I'd hear this little voice in my ear, which was his voice, and he'd be prodding me, and he'd say, "That's your lot again, that is, isn't it? That's your lot in Westminster. How can you live with yourself?" Eventually, I just used to move the chair slightly to the right so he couldn't quite reach any more. But it was a privilege to know Steffan since he got elected in 2016. I think it is very easy to say that people leave a legacy, but I think, as the former First Minister Cowering Jones said earlier, his legacy is an immense one. I think in his own way he has had an effect on everyone in Wales, and I think whether you agreed in the nationalist policy or whatever party political view you aspired from, I think that he sold the message of his party so well that he drew everyone else in Wales a little nearer to his dreams. And I think whatever happens down the road for this great country of ours that he was so proud of, I think that he brought his dream a little closer to everyone's reality.
Di Lloyd.
Thank you, Llywydd. This is a very dark day. It's an honour for me to be able to stand here to pay tribute to you, Steffan. Naturally, we sympathise deeply with your friends and your family, and there is an empty space in the chair next to me. The screen is still black, but there's a huge gap in our group, in our hearts, a gap where Steffan used to be. Steffan was the youngest member of the Plaid Cymru group. He was the baby of the group with a young family, and we are heartbroken. You are an inspiration to us all. A hard and committed worker, living every minute for Wales and for the national future of our nation. I will remember the endless discussions and debates over the very many years that I knew you. Since the by-election back in the 90s, I was there in Islwyn too. The discussions many a time about the history of Wales, the honourable history of our country, as a way of inspiring a nation. And how do you inspire a nation that knows not its history?
Of exquisite legislative detail and creator of Wales's Continuity Bill. Steffan was very conscious of the threat of Brexit to the very existence of Wales and worked tirelessly to construct a protective legislative shield for our people. Steffan was a total inspiration to me personally, to this party of ours, to this Senedd, and to Wales. A shining star of, many have said, with a huge talent and courage, especially these last months, as well as resilience of spirit, a resilience that we all need now. Our prayers are with Steffan's family, yes. Our loss is as nothing compared to their loss. We often say on these Plaid benches, chairs, that we stand on the shoulders of the heroes of Welsh history, longing for national freedom, the noblest of causes. Steffan is one of those heroes now. Cwsg mewn hedd, Steffan Bach.
Thank you to all members for your tributes. It's clear that in his too short a time here, Steffan made an impression across this chamber. Sitting here as I do, I watch many of you typing away as debates carry on around you. Steffan, as we've heard, didn't type. He had his computer disabled when he took his seat so he could listen to debates and take part in debate. Of course, he learnt there was a downside to that, as he then couldn't message me to ask to be called in a debate. However, he quickly learnt that a cheeky smile or a phone text or Sian Gwenllian was just as persuasive to get himself called to speak. And who wouldn't call Steffan Lewis? What he had to say was worth hearing. I'd watch you all, First Ministers, past and present, ministers, backbenchers. You all listened to what Steffan had to say. He spoke with a quiet authority, a clarity of thought, always with something original to say. Steffan was the one to challenge the orthodoxy of the day, and that happened as much within Plaid Cymru as it did within this chamber. Mi gwrddais I a Steffan.
I first met Steffan during the first assembly when he was on work experience with Jocelyn Davies in his early teens. Steffan started his political life at a very young age. He was passionate about his politics then, and he realised his dream in 2016 when he was elected to his National Senedd as a successor to Jocelyn Davies. Although his life was brief, Steffan packed a great deal into it. And he reminded us that we don't really measure the value of a life by its length. Unlike a number of us, Steffan knew every detail of the history of his country and a number of other countries too, not in order to romanticise that history, but rather to understand the history in order to plan the future where everything would be possible for that country. And although he was a very strong advocate for Gwent and the Eastern Valleys, where he had been brought up and where the heritage of both languages, English and Welsh, were important to him, one of his continuous messages was the unity of Wales. He used to get annoyed if he heard too much talk about the North or the West. To him, Wales was one. Steffan was both ordinary and extraordinary. He was kind and sincere and completely serious about the ambition of his country. His example will drive a number of us to work harder for the nation and the country and the community in his name. In closing this meeting of tribute, I take this opportunity once again to sympathise once again with his family, his wife Shona, his young son Celyn, his mother Gail and his siblings Neil and Nia. We will be thinking of you in the very difficult weeks and months to come, and we will remember most dearly our friend Steffan and thank the family for sharing him with us. And to paraphrase Annis Glyn, the poet, a soul who'll shine forever bright and never shall be dimmed his light. Thank you, Steffan, and thank you all.